Hello and welcome back. The topic for this video now, we're going to talk about how viruses are classified. And because viruses don't have quite as complex a structure as bacterial cells, we don't have a whole lot that allows us to classify them. So you're going to see some groupings that are going to happen. But with viral classification, we've got really three criteria that we can use. All right? That first one is the nucleic acid that makes up the virus. And with that nucleic acid, viruses can be either DNA or RNA. You don't have both, though. You've got either DNA or RNA that makes up the virus. And then that DNA and RNA, that nucleic acid, can be broken down even further into single-stranded or double-stranded. And the last thing we can use to classify different viruses is the presence or absence of an envelope. So if that virus is naked, there's no envelope, there's no cell membrane around the outside of it. If there is an envelope around it, then that would be another way to classify the different bacteria. And I have, in the PowerPoints, I've got some slides that show you some different classification schemes. And I'm going to go through here. I've got some different viral families that I want you to pay attention to because these are going to cause disease in humans. Okay? And we're going to talk about first the nucleic acid and the single-stranded or double-strandedness of these various viruses. So what I've got in yellow here, so adenovirus, poxviruses, herpesviruses, papillomaviruses. And I think your book has this as, instead of papillomas, it's actually got it classified as a Verde. But these two are going to be similar. So these viruses are all going to be double-stranded DNA viruses, okay? That's what makes them similar, okay? Now what they do is very different. Adenovirus is one of the viruses that is associated with the common cold, all right? And there are going to be a couple different viruses actually that can cause the common cold. Don't let that throw you, okay? Adenovirus is going to be one, or Adenovirde. Adenovirde is the family name that's associated with that. Poxvirde, the pox that's associated with that tells you a little bit about it because that's going to be the virus that's associated with smallpox, okay? Herpesvirde, this is another one that makes sense based on the name. This is going to be associated with the herpes virus, and I took up my space there. Shoot. That's okay. So the herpes virus, both oral herpes and genital herpes, but also chickenpox falls into this category. It's a herpes virus. So is mono a herpes virus. And I shouldn't say, it's in the same family, okay? So herpes, oral and genital herpes, chickenpox, shingles, they're all herpesviride. They're part of that same family of double-stranded DNA viruses, okay? And then the papoviride or the papillomaviride, this is going to be associated with cervical cancer, okay? So these are all double-stranded DNA viruses. We've got one example of a single-stranded DNA virus. So single-stranded DNA viruses are not as common as double-stranded viruses. And that makes sense because DNA normally it exists as a double strand. It doesn't tend to exist as a single strand, although it does with Parvovirdae, the family Parvovirdae. The disease that's associated with this is fifth disease. Okay? So that's a single-stranded DNA virus. All right, our blue family now, the Paramyxoviridae, the Rhabdoviridae, the Filoviridae. These are all going to be, group those together. These are single-stranded RNA. But now with RNA viruses, the other thing you have to pay attention to is whether or not you've got a positive or a negative strand. This is going to be negative-stranded, the negative polarity associated with the virus. That Rhabdoviridae, this is going to be the family where rabies virus would be classified under. The Filoviridae, this one came up in the news recently, well, maybe not so recently anymore, but with the last Ebola outbreak, and also the Marburg virus is another virus related to Ebola that causes hemorrhagic disease. So these kind of go together. The Paramyxoviridae now, this one is associated with the mumps and also measles fall into this family member. So mumps, measles, Ebola, rabies, these are all single-stranded RNA viruses, okay? And as you can see, what they do in the body varies fairly largely. But really what we're talking about when we're grouping the viruses like this, we're using some characteristic of the virus to group it, okay? So the Picornaviridae and the Coronaviridae now. These are also going to be single-stranded RNA, but now these are going to have the positive polarity associated with it, okay? So it's going to be the positive RNA strand, not the negative RNA strand. And the Picornaviridae, this is going to be the family member where, that should be an O, the poliovirus would be found. The Coronaviridae, this is going to be associated with SARS. Okay. I left one out of here, so we'll add it in. The viral family that Zika is associated with, as well as dengue fever, is it's a flavivirus. So it's Flaviviridae. So Zika, dengue, and there's another one, yellow fever. All come under this category. So these are all single-stranded positive polarity, okay? And then I ran out of colors. So my Retroviridae here, I've got underlined. So the Retroviridae, this is going to be a unique category. All right, the Retroviridae, viruses that are retroviruses, fall into this family. So HIV belongs to the family Retroviridae. And this is going to be a retrovirus. So the RNA is converted to DNA, and then that DNA is converted back to an RNA within the cell, okay? So the retrovirus here is kind of a unique category all on its own. And it has, as part of its package as it comes into the cell, it has something known as reverse transcriptase. And I've got a video later that describes a little bit more about HIV, where I'm going to talk a little bit more about what reverse transcriptase is. So don't worry too much about that right now. Just know that the Retroviridae is really kind of a unique classification. The virus exists as RNA, but that RNA gets converted to DNA, and then that DNA can integrate into the host genome and make RNA. All right? So that one's a little bit different. Our last example here, the Verde. This is associated with if you've had kids who've had a rotavirus. Yeah, these are not fun. All right? The Verde. And fortunately for you, you aren't going to have to pronounce any of these on any of the tests or quizzes. This one is double-stranded RNA, okay? So you can see kind of how some classifications work here. We've got a lot of viruses that exist as double-stranded DNA. We've got a lot of viruses that exist as single-stranded RNA, because normally when we talked about RNA and DNA exists as a double strand, RNA exists as a single strand, but with viruses you can have single-stranded DNA, you can have double-stranded RNA that make up the genome. But as you see, relatively speaking, they're not as common, all right? So the last bit as far as classification is whether or not a virus has an envelope or not. So what I want you to do, and what may help you study, now take these viruses and families that I have listed here. So for the cold virus, smallpox, chickenpox, herpes, cervical cancer, fifth disease, rabies, Ebola, mumps, measles, SARS, Zika, polio, HIV, rotaviruses, okay? Come up with a classification or grouping. On which ones are naked viruses, meaning there's not an envelope around the outside of it, and those that are enveloped, those that have a cell membrane around the outside of it. So if you come up with tables like that, and I made this kind of as a wheel, if you want to come up with a different way of doing it, that's fine. But what I want you to be able to do is recognize the viral family with the disease. So no retroviridae is associated with HIV, flaviviridae, Zika, dengue fever, yellow fever, picornaviridae is poliovirus, coronaviridae, SARS, paramyxoviridae, mumps and measles, filoviridae, Ebola, Marburg, rhabdoviridae, rabies, parvoviridae, fifth disease, Adenovirus, cold, poxoviridae, smallpox, herpes viridae, herpes and chickenpox, as well as shingles, and then papoviridae, cervical cancer. Know how they group versus double-stranded, single-stranded classifications, and then figure out whether they're a naked or an enveloped virus, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, please let me know.